Welcome to part 2 of the Unit 1 Part 2 review. For question number 3, we want to know the shape of this distribution. In this case, this will be symmetric. Specifically bell-shaped. Since this graph looks relatively like a bell. The fourth one. A researcher wants to determine the number of televisions in households. He conducts a survey of 40 randomly selected households and obtains this data. I want to know first and foremost, is this discrete or continuous data? In this case, this is going to be discrete. And the reason for that, it's simply countable. Alright, so part B and C want the frequency and relative frequency distributions. So I'm going to go and pop that over into StatCrunch so we could see about finding that. So with my data inside of StatCrunch, ready? For us to build the frequency and relative frequency charts, I'm going to go to Stat, Tables, Frequency. The column will be that number of TVs that we have, and we want the statistic for this to be the frequency and relative frequency, so I'll just leave them both inside of there. Hitting compute will give us this particular table, involving, in this case, the frequencies and the relative frequencies based on that number of TVs within the household. So, with that being said, there were a couple of additional questions attached to that. So we already saw the frequency and relative frequency. As you can see, they want you to type in those values. But for this, we want what percentage of households in the survey have 3 televisions. So looking at that table that we had, the percentage that had 3, this was 0.2, so 20%. And the percentage of households in the survey that have 4 or more, so 4 was 5%, 5 was 2.5%. So adding those two together, this should be 7.5%. Part F for this one, the frequency histogram of the data. Part G wants the relative frequency histogram of the data. And then to describe the shape. So the frequency histogram and relative frequency histogram are thankfully the same shape. But for this, we want graph, histogram, the number of TVs, and I'm going to do the frequency first and then change this to relative frequency, but as you'll see, they're the same shape anyway. This is the frequency. You could specify the binning for this. So we can have this start at 0 and have a width of 1. That way the bars could be touching what they're supposed to in a histogram like this. But this is what this one looks like. For the relative frequency, let me change this. It looks like this. So exactly the same shape. And then I wanted to know what the shape of this distribution is, but based on the way this looks pretty much like a skewed right distribution. So skewed right. Alright, so the fifth one I have on here. A newspaper claimed that the afternoon hours were the worst in terms of robberies, and provided this graph in support of the claim. Explain how this graph is misleading. Right? So if you look at these intervals down over here, they'll go into intervals of 3 hours, right? 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and so on, right? But this 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., this is a 6-hour time frame. Everything else here are 3s. 3-hour time frames. So meaning that they kind of bunch them in together. So specifically, this is misleading because not all of the intervals not all of the intervals are the same size. So what does that mean? That means if you were to fix that issue and split them up into the 2 3-hour blocks, the actual graph might not be the same shape. Actual graph may not be the same shape. Alright, the next one. The safety manager at Bumbler Enterprises provides this graph to the plant manager and claims that the rate of worker injuries has been reduced by 67% over a 12-year period. Does this graph support this claim? Explain. So as you can see, it went from 0.41 in 1993 down to 0.21 in 2005. But 67%, this would be a no, does not support the claim. No. This needs to start at 0. In this case, the difference doesn't look that giant. But if you were to start at 0, it would definitely paint a different picture. So let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and be on the lookout for part 3 of this Unit 1 Part 2 test review. Thank you.